You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. Today, we are talking with Dr. Bryan Brown, Associate Professor of Science Education and former Associate Dean of the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. Bryan's research explores the relationship between student identity, discourse, classroom culture, and academic achievement in science education. Bryan is the author of the book Science in the City, Culturally Relevant STEM. In addition to his published works, Dr. Brown brings 5th and 6th graders from inner city schools to the Stanford campus for a week-long science camp where the students get excited about biology, physics, chemistry, and engineering, and learn from teachers of color who provide critical role models in their fields. Welcome, Bryan Brown.
I do interviews and some media and lots of talks, but never people who know me. So this is, well, I'll put it this way. My wife used to say, man, I meet a lot of people who say, when you were a kid, you used to break a lot of stuff. You got in a whole lot of trouble. Everybody had a story to tell. So she says, you clearly were a community project. So you know that the most. So.
Well, you know what? You were a godsend to me, Bryan, because your mom had it in for my 2 little boys. Oh, they were the worst boys on the planet, you know. And I'd say, Barbara, they're just boys. They're you know, they can't help it. No, they tear. Every time we come over, Janelle leaves there looking like someone beat her up. I'm like, they're boys, okay. And then about maybe 3 years after you were born, maybe about 40, she says, you know, Kathy, I owe you an apology. So thank you, Bryan.
That's what.
Anyway, so now tell me, what is your title there at Stanford University?
So right now I'm an associate professor and former associate dean of the Graduate School of Education. I am an associate professor of science education, so that is my official title.
So what do you do as the associate professor of science education? You're an educator, or are you a department head? What are we doing?
Well, I'm definitely not a department head. I was an associate dean, which meant I was responsible for curriculum and missions for the School of Education. But that is, I was able to walk away from that. And so my actual job is to train science teachers, to train scientists to better communicate science. And then the bulk of my job, the primary job, is I'm a researcher, and I study ways to improve how people learn science. We work on improving the technology that we use to teach. And so how can we use technology as a way to really master learning for people? So we study ways to make sure that science is taught better and learned better through multiple media.
In the process of doing that, are you mindful of the fact that there may be minority students in there and they may have a whole different approach to learning? Is that part of your process as well? Are you designing programs that would make that easier for a person like me, a little country kid walking into your first class? Going to San Francisco State for the first time and taking my first psychology class, and the word hypothesis came up, and I went, what's a hypothesis?
Well, the quick answer is absolutely. I mean, that's at the heart of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
There is a critical error that people make, which is to assume there's something inherently different about people from different cultural backgrounds, so they need to be taught differently. And so that's not the issue at all. The issue is that we never teach content, we teach people. What I mean by that is that we need to understand who the people are so we can teach them in the best way and teach them in the most appropriate way, most efficient way. And part of what is the problem is that we really have a cultural ethos around science that is, it's only for the most intellectually elite. And if you can't learn it, it's just because you're not smart. And so part of what happens is we get to hide horrible instruction behind this false culture of intellectual elitism, right? And so part of what we make sure we do is get to the essence of how learning works. And so part of it is exactly what you said. If I speak with really complicated language, I can almost assure you won't understand what a person means. And so the logic of that doesn't make sense. In what other context would it be okay to speak in jargon when you know the person doesn't understand, right? And so when you come to a chemistry class, the one thing I fully expect you not to know is chemistry. So I should teach you in a way where I don't use chemistry terms to teach you in a way that intimidates you, right? And so part of what happens is we really get to the heart of learning. And one aspect of it is cultural. So, for example, if I show up in class and I'm the only Black person, I'm the only Mexican person, and a person is using really confusing language, then I may get a cultural symbol that says, or a sense that I'm not supposed to be there, right? Other people, they can look right past it because society says I'm supposed to be there. But for many people, the language sends them a message. And so I spend a lot of time helping educators understand how important that hurdle is, and then what you can do about it. Because I'm a firm believer, if you can do psychological damage, then you can engage in psychological empowerment. So what if we said to that same kid, you know what, I'm going to explain it to you in a way that you really understand. Or the person who's standing in front of you, teaching you, looks like you, sounds like you, comes from a place that you're from, then you can remove all that sense of anxiety and really empower people. So that's the kind of generic version of what we do.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Listen, tell us, my audience, a little bit about yourself, your family, your sibling. Who is Bryan Brown in that sense?
I'm an Oakland, California native. From what I'm learning and realizing and appreciating was a very different time in Oakland. I grew up in a very loving community, a very rich community in terms of culture and people. On my block were people from all over the world who were achieving things. I was a person who, when the knock came on the door and someone came in the house, my mom might say, "Hey, this person is the first Black judge at the thing over there," or "This person is the first lawyer." So I met a lot of people who were the first in lots of different contexts. And I think another peculiar thing is that I didn't know that this cultural excellence I was experiencing was different. Right? I just thought it was what it was. But at the same time, I grew up in Oakland in the 80s and early 90s, where my friends were drug dealers and my friends were getting shot, and I was around violence, but I was in a safe bubble. So I was kind of right in between the best and the worst of Black life in a very loving and supportive environment. And I just had an opportunity to see, I think, the contrast between worlds. And I think that really gave me in some ways some survivor remorse, in that I knew what it could be and had a great deal of appreciation for the things that were afforded me and wanted to give other people a similar opportunity. And so I got into education as a high school science teacher, just trying to really let kids tap into their potential in the same way that I was able to do, because I had lots of opportunities and lots of people pouring into me.
Yeah. So from Oakland, you went from there to an HBCU? What was that?
I decided to go to Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, and it was a beautiful experience. People from, again, Black folks from all over the world, doing great things, shared ambition, and I went from there to teaching in Los Angeles, and then I actually Long Beach, California, and then I got a master's degree in science education from UC Santa Barbara, and a PhD in science education from UC Santa Barbara. So one degree was in educational psychology, so I studied learning, and the second half was science education.
Well, who would have thought our little Bryan would be Dr. Bryan Brown? You can't imagine how...
Not me.
Yeah, not you. No, but it's interesting, though, that you had that experience in Oakland. Do you think it has changed that much from that loving environment that you lived in?
Well, I also think Oakland is a contradiction in what it used to be in the time that it was in that. It was the hub for Black families and Black people to come in the 60s and 70s and make a life for themselves, and thinking of that these were the children of the people from the Great Migration who moved from the South, who made their way to California, and really, I think, had an opportunity to build families and provide context. So that was what was happening at the time. But then you add to the context of the drugs that happened in the 70s, I mean, late 70s, early 80s, and the poverty that happened. And you have generations of kids still struggling behind kind of the drug wars that really ripped apart East Oakland in particular, where I grew up most of my life. And so I think that context in that city, there's a very interesting contradiction there as well, because it's always been an intellectual city, a really conscientious city where people think hard about political and social issues and take action. And that's the kind of people I grew up with. I mean, I grew up around conversations about what we need to do in society and what's the role of Black family and Black life. And so for that, I'm just hugely appreciative of, because I was around people who are really thinkers.
Now, you can give a lot of credit to your parents because they were thinkers and they attracted people to them much like themselves. When you were growing up in that environment, what was your goal? Did you set goals for yourself or were they set for you? How did you come to be the Bryan Brown you are?
Now that's an interesting conversation, because one of the things my parents were supportive, but not directive, meaning that they gave me a sense of you decide which area we're going, and then we'll support you in that direction. And so with that in mind, I was just competitive. And so my goal in school was to be better than whoever else I was around. I didn't really have a goal that was to get a 4.0 or be this or be that. I was just competitive. And so that really helped me do well academically and transcend it. And so when I started to make decisions about what I wanted to be in life when I got to college, I had to ask myself what really motivated me. If I'm going to get up every day and work hard at something, I knew money and making money was not necessarily going to do it for me. And I saw education as a place where I can inherently kind of pursue the passion and really want to help people. And so people looked at me funny. I mean, I really had people say, I was a high school valedictorian, I had good grades, I did well in college, and people were like, why would you teach? That motivation, I think, really helped me to really push myself in that area. So, and my family never blinked. They said, you have to figure out how to make that the life that you want it to be, and supported me all along. And it's been a beautiful ride over. I've been in this business for 17 years. There's never a dull moment.
Your first teaching position, were you the Black guy on the staff, or were they just going to wait and see how Bryan was going to make a contribution?
I feel like my life has always been lived in contradiction. So meaning this, people used to comment as I'm talking about as early as like 12, 13 years old. Like, you're different, right? And here's why you're different. You're hanging out with these kids, but you're doing well in school. And I always questioned, like, that sounded like a real backhanded compliment, as if I was supposed to be not doing well in school because I hung around certain people, or vice versa. Like, the people that I hang around, are they not supposed to do well in school? So what are you saying about me? Right. And so throughout my lifetime, that has always been the narrative. So when I started as a teacher, my goal was to be a good teacher. So I listened. I learned from people who were offering wisdom, and I got a lot of surprise. Most of the Black people we get who come in early, they're not as prepared. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't I be prepared? And so part of what happened was I learned to find the best in people. Not all advice is good advice, but all advice comes from a position where people are trying to help. And so I learned to filter through what was available, and was fortunate enough to get a lot of good advice from a lot of people who really were excellent educators. I think being a young teacher is important, because I was young trying to learn how to teach, and that would really help me connect with my students, motivate them. And so I feel like one of the things that happens in school that people don't talk about is they give the Black people all the people that they can't deal with. And so I became the classroom for anybody who was unmanageable. And so that was always a challenge. But at the end of the day, I learned that young people just want to be heard, loved on, supported. And if you can do that, you can bring out the best of them. And so I never look back and say, at least we didn't try. We had a lot of great young kids coming to the schools and classrooms.
I was asked to go into Atherton High, do a diversity course with children who were at risk. And it was a 4-week process. I'd come every Tuesday, and we'd have a 1-hour session. And the first day I was there, those kids behaved the way they had been allowed to behave. Okay, they're throwing paper, they're passing notes, they're talking to one another. And about 20 minutes into the session, I stopped, folded my hands, and watched them. And finally, they realized that There wasn't a person talking in front. They turned around. They looked like, what's going on here? And I said to them, guys, I got my education. So this is not any benefit to me to stand here and be treated with disrespect. You, on the other hand, are just beginning your education, but you're not going to get it behaving the way you behave. So listen, I'm going to go home. I'm done with you today. If you want me to come back, you talk to your teachers. And when I come back, I want you to respect me. I left. The teachers called me and said, you can't talk to those students like that. And I said, excuse me? They said, you can't talk. I said, well, let me tell you one thing about those students. Those students get up every morning, walk out of their door in East Palo Alto. They have to look up and down the street, and they can tell at 200 yards how safe it is to go in that direction. They have to read it. And you're standing in front of their face. They read you day one. They know you're frightened of them, that you don't respect them, and they treat you that way. But what I told those two students are, I respect you and I want to help you, but I will not do it unless you respect me. So they said, well, we have to take a vote. I said, fine. The principal, Gerald Guess, calls me. He says, Kathy, please come back to the school. Everything's going to be cool. Don't worry about it. I said, okay, no problem. I don't have a problem. Came in, did my work. We had the best sessions. On the fourth session, we had about 15 minutes left of the class. And this little Mexican kid gets up and says, I told him they could do, we did a lot of role play during these courses. And so he said, can we role play you? And I said, sure. So he gets up, he folds his hands, and he repeats verbatim every word I said to those kids on that first day. And then I howled. It was so funny. I was laughing, the students were laughing, and after that, every student, can we do you? Can we do you? And I said, sure. And we left at the end of the session. I hugged the kids, they hugged me, they left. And the teachers, Bryan, they didn't get it. What they didn't see is that those kids heard every word I said. And that meant something to them. I was talking to them. I wasn't talking about them. And they said, oh, were you upset? I said, heck no. I had the best time. They had the best time. And I don't know, walking away, it seemed like those teachers never did understand what happened there.
We call it the gift, is that you have to consider kids will pretend they don't want to be here, right? But a person who doesn't want to be in class, they're not in class. Right? They didn't get up at 7, jump on a bus, come across town, get off the bus, walk into the classroom, go for an hour and go to another class. If you really didn't want to be there, the fact is you would be someplace else. So just showing up is a gift. And so part of what we have to recognize is that once they show up, what we need to do is make sure they know why they're there. And for some kids, they don't understand their education is $1 million opportunity. And it's our responsibility to make it clear to them, why would you know? You're 14. You don't understand. You don't understand the scope of how what you're doing can change a generation. And I think of my kids right now who think, the culture of Sanford University is normal. My getting a degree because my parents work, it has a generational impact. And so I can't expect a 14-year-old to understand that you doing well in school could change a generation unless I tell them, unless I show them. And so part of what we have to do is to be honest about what the real role of education is and make sure we communicate it. And they'll trust the real person. I mean, and that's at the heart of it. We need to make sure we have people who can really love on the kids in a way where they really can feel it.
Yeah, and you can tell a teacher who has that love. The room is alive when you walk in. The walls are alive with their statements and their work is on the wall. And a teacher who doesn't care, it's just, I don't know, you can just feel the difference between a loving teacher and a good teacher and one that isn't quite, jiving with the kids. Were there any obstacles that you had to overcome as you moved through your career, Bryan?
I mean, I started teaching making $29,000 in Los Angeles. So you think about what that means. So I spent basically from 1996 to 2003 when I became a professor at Michigan State, working 2 jobs. So I was working from 7 to 9 most days because in order to keep the lights on, I couldn't have one job. And so I mean, that was a very difficult time. When this is all during I was in graduate school, and so there were definitely financial challenges. And then, other challenges are people with low expectations of who you might be and the work that you do. I'm still a place, I go to a place where if I talk about urban schools, generally I'm talking about the places where I taught, Long Beach, places like Oakland where I do research, in San Leandro, where most of the students are Black, they're Mexican, they're Samoan, it's a diverse cultural population. Right? But when I show up, people will say, you're the Black kids that you're talking about. And I'm like, wait a second. I never said anything about talking to you about Black kids. And so people operate from a filter of who they believe I am without asking, who they believe I am without listening. And so part of what I've learned over the years is that, you have to be clear about who you are and where you're coming from, because people will often make assumptions, often wrong. I've had people literally apologize to me. They say, where did you grow up? And I said, I grew up in Oakland. They go, oh, I'm sorry. It must have been terrible. I'm like, bro, what? Really? So I can see the number of times that it's happened in Northern California, right here in Palo Alto. So you're dealing with people's ignorance, and you can either take it and let it make your experience worse, or learn from it and work through it. But it is the reality of what we're dealing with. And so that has been part of it. Lots of kind of racism. They call them microaggressions, but to me, there's nothing micro about it. It's prejudice in and of itself. And so that happens here because people are ignorant, and it's part of the world we live in.
Well, I think they also have this shield. They think they're not ignorant because they get so much information over the media and a constant flow of it. Never mind that the information may be a little slanted in the wrong direction, and they haven't filtered out the wrongness of it. So they're taking that as gospel. And what really drives me crazy as a Black female, Black mother, Black grandma, is the story that is told over and over again about the downtrodden Black woman who was a coke addict, and the husband left, and the kids grew up in spite of everything and became, this fabulous doctor. It's like, no, every kid I know went to college, graduated, did well, had parents who loved their socks, would do anything for them, kept them in a home, fed them every day, provided for them in every way they could. I don't have a Black friend that I can say misused or left their child behind. It just didn't happen in my lifetime. And that's a generation. I can go back a generation and look at my own crazy country family. Yeah, they were country and they were picking onions and whatnot, but guess what? We picked it together. We ate together. They made sure I got an education, what little bit they could educate me with. And, that was my life. So I'm waiting for someone to tell those stories one day about our community.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it because, this just you mentioned earlier. So my parents, my dad was a principal, vice principal and a principal at juvenile hall schools and court schools. And my mom worked in insurance. Mm-hmm. And my household was full of Black excellence. It was Black families there all the time. She cooked, and people come through and they cook and drink and joke and talk and have a good time. But it was about families. And it is, people talk about, I remember when the Cosby Show came out and there was a critique of how fictitious the Cosby Show was, right? That was my experience. I lived in a Cosby-esque household, paired and connected with lots of other people who lived exactly the same way. And so I always think about the success that I was able to achieve was a consequence of the labor put forth by my mother and father, right? They made it such where achievement was just the next step because the opportunities were laid out for me. So I think that story is oftentimes not communicated well. And this is what I was mentioning earlier about growing up in Oakland in the 80s, when literally I was around the first Black judge, but he wasn't an abstract idea. He was my mom's friend who was at the house drinking and playing spades. I was around professors who were, not spades, they were playing bid whist, listening to Frankie Beverly and Mays, cracking jokes. Right?
Hello.
Engineers, doctors, lawyers, everybody you can think of, this was family. And so I wasn't conscious of it at the time because it was just the people who was around. And I do remember a specific conversation I had with my mother about teaching and the financial decision about teaching. And she said to me, you know a lot of educators. She made me name them. Think about people who are teachers or principals. and you tell me how they're living right now, right? And we talked about each of those people. And what I realized is, happy people doing really important things, but not a single person who I thought was impoverished, who looked like they were poor, you know what I mean? And so that really was helpful for me to think about career-wise, if I can make a decision about passion, or do I need to make a financial decision about where I wanted to be, because I was able to see it. And I understand that's a privilege. I didn't know that the people she knew were, I didn't know this at the time, but they were principals and vice superintendents, and so they were high in educational infrastructure, which made sense to me now. But that vision of being able to be what you can see is a byproduct of people breaking through the opportunities that were burst open in the 70s and 80s. And then quite honestly, what people try to work against. Oh, yeah. Right? They saw this black success and said, hold on, we need to do something differently. You lived on the East Coast while going to school,
I think we're seeing a lot of that you were raised on the West Coast. Did you see a difference in the culture on either coast?
Couple things. There was some generational wealth when I got to Hampton University that I had never encountered before, where grandma went to Hampton, great-grandmother went to Hampton, and grandma was a lawyer, and great-grandpa had a job, and so I hadn't seen that. So these were people who did not move in the Southern migration in the 20s to the 40s to try to get jobs. They had been in Virginia and D.C. Or in Atlanta and thriving. And so that was shocking to me in some ways. I hadn't seen that. The diversity of black culture, meaning this, I realized that although we lived in a black community, it was a middle-class community, it was a thriving middle-class community, it was all black. And most middle-class communities that people were coming from, they were the only black person among white people everywhere. And so I had a much different lens on things. Also, was that growing up in California was also very multicultural in the neighborhoods and schools as well. And so I also had a vision of what multiculturalism might look like that was a little bit different, because I was used to people from different backgrounds and creeds. And so being in that context was really interesting to me, because black people come from different contexts across the world and are very different, but the shared identity is the focus and love of culture, which I thought was absolutely beautiful. And it was nothing like it. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Al and I visited Ghana probably about 8-9 years ago, and found it to be very interesting and very diverse itself. There's a lot of different people that live there from all over the world. When they talk about immediate welcoming of people and making sure they have a meal and making sure they're comfortable in your home, even if you don't like the person in a black home, in my experience, you're going to be welcome as long as they're not going to disrespect you, they're not going to treat you poorly in their home. And that is so African. And I just didn't realize where it came from. So I think what we both have experienced is really that African diaspora has been reliving what the ancestors gave us and not realizing just quite what it was.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I've been really thinking about also for black people, African Americans, not really having a vision of how profoundly we shaped America and how we are responsible for the positive things that America has become, both culturally. And here's what I mean by that. I wrote a book recently, and part of the book talks about educational dilemma, meaning that we've only had full access to education since the late 60s, meaning you couldn't go to every university in the United States. You couldn't go to University of Mississippi. You couldn't go to University of Virginia. They had to break down the walls to get access in the 60s, right? So that meant the first generation to really have full access to all the universities didn't happen until the children of those in the 60s who were born in the late 60s, early 70s. We're talking about Generation X. So we're only really one full generation deep into full education. And that happened because of the civil rights movement. African American people saying we need to change the structure of this country. So then what happened? People from all over the world, literally all over the world, came to the United States and benefited from the educational system that black people provided access to. And then look at the black people as if there was something wrong with the black people who created the opportunity that they're benefiting from to this very day. And we don't see that as our history, nor do we see voting rights history, right? So it was black people who kicked down the door to make sure that full voting rights was available. But again, that didn't happen until the 60s. So you think about it, mid 70s, you can say, no, we have women's suffrage, we're trying to make sure African American people, underrepresented groups have voting rights, right? That didn't happen until the 70s. So who did it? Again, that is the legacy of those folks who lived in the 60s and kicked down the doors. And that's the heritage that I come from. And I'm amazed that we don't really celebrate people like C.T. Vivian, who's passed away, John Lewis, who just passed away. Like, what they did has had such a generational impact on who are not black. And I'm not sure they even recognize in the way that they should just exactly what our ancestors were able to pull off.
You know, I think the only way we can do that, Bryan, is to change our history books and start including, though, not only just black people, but the white people who stood beside them. This is a country that was shared by everyone. Let me ask you a question. When Harriet Tubman put that train together that we talk about, that underground thing, so you think she had tracks on that baby? You think there were train cars that she was putting people into? You think they bought a ticket to get up here, up to the north? I said, no. Who do you think owned the land that she was traveling across? It wasn't a black person. It wasn't a white woman. It was a white male. And guess what? He took his life in his own hands and risked his life to help her and those. Now, doesn't that make it a whole different scene about what America really is? That, yeah, black folks, we start the movement, we fight, but we're not the only ones in the movement because it wouldn't be successful if we were. Okay?
Absolutely.
So we need to, this inclusion business has to be truthful inclusion, include everybody that helped us fight. Because you look at that Pettus Bridge, even the first march, it was not just black people. Now, we struck the match.
Second one, they had to send for some reinforcements, and then
we saw you guys get your head whooped in. Maybe next time
exactly.
we're gonna help you out. But I think if they just told everyone's history, that there are people of all colors and races, and I don't believe in it. So ethnicities and cultures that have been fighting for this right, and we have opened the doors for every one of them. Made especially white women, they have benefited so much from this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it should be celebrated. And that's to me, I think the big mistake is to not celebrate that particular contribution, because it is one way where you really can't dispute it. How African Americans have really been the moral lens to the U.S. and have opened many opportunities that people from every background have benefited from.
Now, in the Stanford environment, what are the pros and cons about the Stanford environment?
Well, the pros are really easy. I'm among world-class thinkers, and when I mentioned before, I grew up, I was really competitive, and so that has helped me because I'm with people who are doing work that is just phenomenal, and that is the expectation. I need to get to their level. So I think that has pushed me to really be more ambitious than I might have been otherwise, and to be more focused. So that is a great benefit. There's lots of resources. For example, we were thinking about using technology to improve education. Let me be explicit about this. So a lot of people talk about stereotype threat. So if I am familiar with a negative stereotype, then if I go into an assessment because I know, okay, traditionally black people don't do well on this test or something like that, then I'll do worse just because I'm taking up mental space, right, with this awareness. It's almost the analogy I use is like trying to park a car, or parallel park a car, and your music is really loud. Like, you can still do it, but you need to turn down the music. So it's like doing that with music turned on, right? So in trying to build technology that affirms, because I'm trying to invert the process. So what we wanted to do was to figure out if we created virtual reality software. So we're going to teach science, virtual reality, kids put the goggles on. Could we do it in a way that sends messages of affirmation to the young people so they know, okay, this is a culture forming. Well, here, someone finds out that I'm planning a project, I get a knock on the door, and there's a computer programmer, and he says, hey, I want to work on this project for you. I'll do it for free. And that's the kind of community that's here. And so we're able to spend 4 years building some really innovative software to teach science, but to also build in really subtle affirmations about community belonging. And that's the only, I mean, that kind of thing happens in places where you have great connectedness, you have great innovation, and you have great resources. And so Stanford's been great for that. Platform, I feel like people magnify your work. And so if you get work out, it travels pretty quickly because of the Stanford brand. Negatives, and I've been happy here, so there's not too many negatives. I mean, I mentioned before, there is some bias. I've been asked what sport do I coach, because people put me in a category and can't figure out why I'm here. But beyond that, it's been generally positive.
Well, you've become a family man. You have children and a lovely wife. Tell me a bit about your expectations and your how you were raising your children. How do you feel about them?
Interesting conversation we just had today about what are we preparing kids for, right? And so we were talking about the critique of spanking and where that came from historically in Black communities, and how right now we're preparing kids for, to be emotionally strong, to be disciplined both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And for me, it's pretty simple. I just need to follow the blueprint my parents laid out, which was to say, I need you to have some clarity about who you want to be and who you are. And I'm fully in support of that, but it's about what you decide. And I can't make you make decisions about what you think you are, right? But I want you to be passionate about pursuing the things that make you who you are, So both of my kids, I have a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old, and those are the conversations we're having, and I don't expect you to know, but I do expect you to try. And that's different, trying to figure out what is your thing. And it's fun to watch. I really feel like they live in a world where people have lied to them about education. They feel like if you don't get a 4.0 and you don't go to Harvard, you're not a success. And the irony is that all the people they think are phenomenal around here, they didn't graduate, right? They're talking about people who went to school, figured out what they wanted to do, and then did it. And so we try to break that lie around here and say, let's set a new standard. Why not be successful in what you do? Make some money doing that. Have a lot of love in your life. Be spiritually strong. Be connected. We need a new word for it, right? And so we talk about, that's our goal. Let's be well-rounded, but support each other and let's have a good time doing it.
That's fabulous. I think it takes the pressure off of a child when you say, do what you want to do, but do the best. You be the best. Study hard and learn your craft or your trade, and be successful. That's all we ask, and we'll help you in every way. And
I would argue, wouldn't that be the goal? Because I'm definitely spoiled. I've made no qualms about it. If spoiled is a criterion, then that happened to me for sure, right? Mm-hmm. I appreciate it, but there's no doubt there was not a need that didn't go met, and so I would argue, I would like that right for all of us, for everybody, every generation to come. Let's be able to do that, make that what we do. So I hear him. I really do.
But we once again, we're back to the media. The media tells us that all Black people somehow let their kids down. And I'm saying, in my generation, with all the friends I had, including your parents, our intent was never to let you down, never have you feel you couldn't accomplish anything in life. And is that not, that's not Black? No, it just has nothing to do with race. It has to do with, we had the means to do that.
Yeah. We did what we did. And that should be the new norm. Sign me up for it. And we talk about here. And I guess the question is, what do you have things for? And if you're going to be successful, who is it for? And I would argue it's definitely for family and it's for community. We should be helping people. I was at a talk this morning from Ta-Nehisi Coates, and he said something really interesting. He had been quoted by saying, Martin Luther King's quote about the arc of history bends towards more justice, and he was like, it doesn't, right? It bends towards chaos, right? And his argument was, then he said, well, it bends towards evil. And because his argument was that as we get older, generation after generation, if it bended towards justice, you would see a more moral version, a more moral offspring, a more just approach. Instead of people using technology to new technology, that new technology will use to impact the world in positive ways as opposed to people looking after themselves. And so the statement was that we really have to work hard to live in a moral place, knowing that injustice is the way that it is. Otherwise, it would be absolute chaos. And so the argument is that for Black life, let's make this community a community of love and support. And we have to work at shielding ourselves against the chaos and evil that's out there, because it's out there and it hasn't changed. The technology has gotten better, right? So what I want you to be healthy and whole, because I want to raise a generation of compassionate human beings, right, that fight against evil because it's wrong and won't adapt to it. You know what I mean? And so part of what's happening is, I think generation after generation, I do need you to look back 2 generations ago and ask yourself, what were those people doing? And the more I look backwards, the more I find just how amazing it is. I mean, I've really been in a position to say, when my grandparents, moved to California as a Pullman porter, and raised a family and was able to do that and put everybody through school and keep them healthy. And it's amazing to me.
Yeah.
It is absolutely amazing. And so I think we need to tell these generational stories. We need our own media, because the stories of urban plight are misrepresented. There's far too many, especially considering people don't know this. We are achieving degrees at all-time high in terms of rates. In terms of the Black women right now, on average, earn the highest degrees per capita. So when you combine race and culture, the highest percentage of people with master's degrees are Black women. But we don't talk about that, how we are achieving. And as I mentioned before, we only started having access to education in the 70s. So Black people are doing things in amazing ways right now, but we're not telling those stories. We're not capturing that energy. And it will be a different narrative. And so I mourn for George Floyd. I mourn for Breonna Taylor. I just need us to tell the other stories of the incredible things and people who are going out there and changing the world every day and doing great things. Because that's a reality I know as well.
That's right. And in addition to mourning them, though, I have to praise those young people, Black, white, and all in between, who stepped out into those streets and said, we're just not going to take this anymore. This man deserved a better way to be treated. And it's not about his race even. They were talking about the behavior of the so-called law enforcement officers. That's what they were talking about. Yeah. And so it's not, when they say these aren't, they were peaceful protesters, but they were protesting something that could affect everyone. And once again, Black folks are usually the canary in the cage. Whatever is happening to us, be very careful. If you can let it continue and let it grow, it will happen to all of you. So if you continue to let your law enforcement officers treat a person like an object, put their knee on their neck, guess what? You're next in line, buddy. And they won't be looking at color, because those guys are trained to be warriors, to bring the peace, as they call it. And I don't think they really care the color of your skin when they start breaking down your door in the dark and shooting your girlfriend up with 6 bullets, okay?
Correct.
No,
correct. No, they can't see humanity. Because you'd ask a different question. What if this is the wrong house? And that's a question of humanity.
Yes.
Right? People don't need to die. So we've got to grow in our humanity, and I'm glad our young people are demanding that we do it. It's impressive.
Absolutely. Well, Bryan, I am proud to know you, and I think our education system is very fortunate to have you within its confines. And Stanford is, I'm sure they're pleased to have you on their staff. And I want to thank you for giving me this time today and sharing your insights on how we're educating our young people today and how to educate young people. One other question.
No, thank you for the example you set. The whole Cotton family, many conversations over the years. You are that Black excellence that made it easy to achieve. I got a chance to see it firsthand. So thank you to the entire family. I really appreciate it.
We try. Hey, just like Mom and Dad, we're right there with them. Barbara was my ace when she first came to the Bay Area. But let me ask you this: if you could look back at the young Bryan Brown, say, let's not go back when he was running across my piano. Do you remember that, Bryan? We're getting ready to go someplace, and Barbara gets in the car. She says, "Where's Bryan?"
Many stories.
But if you could look back at that little guy, what would you tell him about the future to get him ready?
I would say think big. I really did not have an expectation of myself other than to do more. And I didn't have, I think there's an audacious expectation around here that helps people when they try to solve a problem. It's never, I want to figure out why there's a pothole in the street. They want to fix all streets everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I would tell the younger me, think big. You can do whatever God's laid out for you. It's right there in front of you. And so think big. And I tell my kids the same thing. There is nothing in between you and success other than time. So you just need to step forward.
That's right. And I love the one thing that the Awopa says to people: you don't know what God's plan is for you. So,
absolutely,
prepare yourself for whatever.
I'm a living testimony. You couldn't tell me I was going to be a college professor. Who knows?
Well, I'm so glad you are. And again, say hello to your lovely wife and your great kids. And
well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And we'll get together. We've got to be
6 feet apart, but plenty of barbecue. How's that?
I've been working on barbecue this whole time.
All right. Thanks again, Bryan. Take care. Thank you, Bryan, for speaking so candidly about your life in the Oakland Bay area and your work at Stanford University. You can follow Dr. Brown and his work at the website scienceinthecity, all one word, .stanford.edu. A website especially designed for teachers in urban schools that offers lesson plans that are culturally relevant but also match NGSS expectations. Thank you again, Dr. Brown, and thank you for listening.